You're listening to The Central Cast, a podcast for mystics and misfits just like you. The Central Cast is recorded before a live audience every week at our church in Glendale, California. Thanks for tuning in.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I want to begin today with this quote from a French philosopher and theologian named Gabriel Marcel, who said this: "I am carried along by a great mystery that transcends me, but also endlessly includes me as it manifests itself as me." Hear that again. I am carried along by a great mystery that transcends me, but also endlessly includes me as it manifests itself as me. What is he talking about? We are not just that which contemplates the infinite. We are not just that which contemplates ultimate reality, but we are the infinite and ultimate reality itself. We are a manifestation of it. We are an incarnation of it. We are a personification of it. In other words, when we ask, what does it mean to be human? It's always me as a human being asking, what does it mean to be human? When we ask, what is consciousness? It's always me and my consciousness asking, what is consciousness? Or when I ask, what is the universe? It's always me as part of the universe asking such a question. In other words, we are not just contemplating these things as if they are somehow separate and outside of us, but we are always contemplating these things as the things themselves, which reveals something important. It reveals our connection and our oneness with all things. And I bring this up today because over the next 3 weeks, I'm going to be doing a series here called VBS for Mystics. Usually every summer I do a series called VBS for Heretics, right? You're familiar with that? And for those of you who don't know what VBS means, that acronym, who knows what it means? Who can say it? Vacation Bible School. If you grew up evangelical, you know all about Vacation Bible School. You're probably also still recovering. But this is the name of the series we're going to be doing over the next 3 weeks, VBS for Mystics. And I wanted to start today with this quote from Marcel because it reveals our grandeur. It reveals our cosmic nature and our oneness and connection with all things, which I personally believe, to be the most important story we can possibly tell, and a story with profound spiritual and social implications. And we need a story like this, I think, perhaps more now than ever, as it feels like our world is falling apart. And we're left wondering, how, if at all, can our faith, if we have faith, how can it help us cope in times like these, especially for us, progressive, deconstructed, post-evangelicals who can no longer rely on the story or the faith of our upbringing about this, there's an all-powerful supreme being up there in control. He's guiding history, and of course it's a he. He's guiding history and controlling outcomes so that everything works out great in the end. Was this not the story that we were raised on? That used to be the story that we believed in, yes? And it gave us great comfort and hope in times like these. But many of us, myself included, just can't believe in that story anymore. Not like that. So what is the story for us now? Is there still a story? A myth, if you will. And by myth, I do not mean false or fictitious. A myth is simply a life-defining, worldview-defining story that provides us meaning and identity. What myth, what story can provide us meaning and identity and solace and hope in times like these? I believe we need myths and stories that do that. We are meaning-making machines as human beings. I didn't come up with that term. We are meaning-making machines. We are storytelling creatures as human beings, and we need stories. That's why I think film and the arts are so important, because they tell stories. Even atheists need a story to believe in. Their myth would be that there is no God, that there's nothing transcendent or anything beyond the material realm, nothing beyond what science can tell us about ourselves and the world. And so all we have is each other and this one life and this one world. So let's make the most of it. Let's really invest ourselves here and now and in enhancing human well-being. That can be a very meaningful and life-giving story or myth for some. But to be clear, it is a myth. It is a story, albeit an atheistic one. It is a grand overarching story that defines reality and identity for a lot of people. But I think there's another story to tell. Perhaps a better story, a truer story, and one that I think works better for most of us. And it's the story about our connection and our oneness with all things, and about how our consciousness, that which we call our consciousness, is not just, the novel byproduct of an advanced brain, but part of the infinite and cosmic mind that undergirds all things. This is where I'm at. This is my mysticism. It doesn't have to be yours, but I'm going to share with you where I'm at, what story I believe in. And I know that sounds pretty woo. Maybe that sounds a little new agey, but it's not as woo or new agey as one might think. There's actually some science behind this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I don't want your eyes to glaze over too much. But the latest research shows that our old assumptions about consciousness are wrong. Consciousness is not something that only arises in the brains of complex creatures like us, but it's probably fundamental to reality itself. And I say probably because we don't know for sure. We could always be wrong. Got to stay humble and open-minded, right? But an increasing number of researchers from a variety of fields are reaching the conclusion that consciousness and mind is a fundamental property of the universe and the underlying nature of all things. And they're reaching this conclusion for a few reasons, not the least of which is that it's the only explanation that adequately solves the so-called hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem is this: if everything is matter, then why is some matter conscious and other matter not? Why does a particular combination of matter, meaning the combination that makes up our brains, why does that exhibit consciousness and other combinations of matter not or don't? This problem has been impossible to solve from a purely materialist standpoint. And so many are coming to the conclusion that consciousness and mind are inherent and a fundamental property of the universe, which is incredible. In other words, mind doesn't rise out of matter. Rather, matter rises out of mind, or is a manifestation of mind. This doesn't mean that everything is conscious and aware just like we are. Obviously, rocks and the chairs you're sitting in don't have an inner life or a sense of experience like we do, but they are part of this ubiquitous field of consciousness that gives existence and being to all things. In other words, matter, on the smallest scale, we're talking the subatomic quantum level, is not physical stuff like Lego building blocks, which is what the materialists pretty much maintain. But rather, matter on the smallest scale is immaterial mind itself, a cosmic mind that undergirds all things, matter, space, and time. Everything. It's all a manifestation of mind. To be clear, many of the scientists who hold this view, which is generally called panpsychism, many of them are atheists or agnostic and do not see this as an innately religious or theological view in any way. And they're right, it doesn't have to be. They would say just because the universe is conscious doesn't mean the universe is God and demands worship, forgives sins, answers prayers, has rules about sex or what you can eat on the holiday, what. So one should not conflate religion, especially traditional religion, with this view. However, one should not also not go to the opposite extreme and assert there's nothing spiritual or mystical about this at all. I believe there is. And this is where what's called pantheism or panentheism comes into play. This idea that God is all or all is inside of God, which are ancient ideas. These are not new age ideas. These are ancient ideas, and really, in my opinion, the most compelling and healthy spiritual views to hold, and very Christian to boot. Christian mystics for millennia have been talking about our oneness with God and God's oneness with all things. This kind of thinking has always been part of the Christian tradition, albeit kind of marginalized. And it was considered orthodoxy at different times by different people. It's also been labeled heresy. You might remember that Jesus of Nazareth himself was sentenced to death by the religious authorities of his day for blasphemy, because according to them, he, a mere man, claimed to be God. And he didn't just claim that he was divine, but he claimed that we are all the sons and daughters of the Most High. We are all the children of God. And that was unthinkable to his contemporaries, to the religious authorities. It always has been, to the uptight religious authorities in our midst. And they put him to death for it. Mysticism has always been at the heart of the gospel. This idea that we are one with the Father. And it's really an idea. Mysticism is basically this idea of oneness with the divine essence around us. This idea is not just the heart of the gospel, but really any religion or spiritual tradition worth its salt, in my opinion, because it's true. And it's the most life-giving and healing or meaningful story I believe we have. It's a story I believe we should be telling. And this is where I believe we need to take things as, deconstructed former evangelicals who are still invested in this thing called Christianity and spirituality. And it's okay if you're not, right? This is a community, as Julie was saying, it's okay if you're not. But for those of us who are, in my opinion, we need to become mystics. We need to embrace a kind of mysticism here and get away from traditional concepts of God because they're so fraught with problems. The biggest of which has to do really with God's power, this notion of God's power, namely this idea that, God is this all-powerful supreme being, kind of like Superman, right? And therefore we can count on him to swoop in at the last minute and save the day. That is, of course, if we believe in him enough and pray enough, right? If we do, he will supernaturally intervene in our lives or in history, and he will heal us of cancer or stop a hurricane or get us that new job, whatever. I can't tell you how much damage that idea of God, which is probably the most common, and yes, that's the 11 o'clock cuckoo. Kind of like it. I can't tell you how much damage that theology does. I meet people all the time in my work as a hospice chaplain who feel utterly abandoned by God because they find themselves day after day, week after week, month after month, withering away in unspeakable suffering in bed, waiting to die. And they ask me, where is God? What in the world is taking him so long? Why would he allow me to just wither away like this? Is crazy. Depending on the individual, depends on my response. But in my opinion, they would be a lot better off if they had been taught that God is not a being, but the beingness of beings. God is the word we use for the infinite and the cosmic consciousness that undergirds all things. God is ultimate reality. We should have been taught that, which again is an ancient idea. This isn't some newfangled thing that the hippies in the 60s came up with. This is even prior to Christianity, Plato, others. They would be a lot better off. We would be a lot better off if we understood God as the word we use for the infinite and that which undergirds all things. For in him we live and move and have our being, the Apostle Paul says in Acts 17, to invoke some biblical rhetoric there. Once we stop thinking of God as a being, an object, an invisible guy in the sky, once we stop thinking of God that way, we can also stop thinking, I believe, of God's power in those traditional human ways too, as if he's Santa Claus or Superman. Once we stop thinking that way, we'll be a lot better off, I think. And I want to finish today with this other quote from Marcel. He says this: "You know you've learned to love someone when you've seen in them that which is too beautiful to die. And you know you've learned to love yourself when you've seen in yourself that which is too beautiful to die." And the thing about us, I think, that's too beautiful to die, again, is this: we are infinite. We are not just that which contemplates the infinite or contemplates consciousness. We are not just that which contemplates life and being, but we are the essence of consciousness, life and being itself. We are the unborn and undying mind of God. And when we live into this truth, we cannot help but love ourselves and others on the deepest level, I believe. And here we find the social implications of this story and how it causes us to be people preoccupied with matters of love and justice, compassion and empathy, because we realize the other in our midst, the person sitting next to you, it's just you in another form. When we see migrants getting brutalized by ICE and bounty hunters today, we understand that's just me in another form. When we see trans folks having their rights and dignity stripped away, we understand that's just me in another form that's happening too. When we see the poor this week lose their SNAP and Medicaid benefits, or about to, whenever this bill goes into effect, we understand that's just me in another form. Let's also remember Jesus' words in Matthew 25, my favorite words perhaps of Christ, where he says this, I was the hungry person you fed. I was the stranger and the foreigner that you welcomed. I was the thirsty person you gave water to. That was me. When you've done it to one of the least of these, you have done it unto me. Here we find at the heart of the gospel this idea of God's oneness with us and our oneness with God and each other, and how all of that is meant to create this environment of radical mutuality, love, and compassion. This is the gospel. These are the deeper social implications of this story of oneness and connection and mysticism. And I think we undergo a kind of ego death, a crucifixion of the self when we accept this. And thereby we also experience a resurrection, but not a resurrection of the old self or the old ego, but a resurrection into a higher state of being where we find the deepest peace and the deepest love of ourselves and each other possible. And I think this is so healing and life-giving because when you think about it, what ails us most as human beings, things like anxiety, self-hate, depression, and countless other maladies, these things are often rooted in our deep, unmet needs for love and connection, are they not? They're rooted in trauma and feelings of disconnection and isolation and loneliness, maybe from our childhood or whenever. The fact is, we all just want to be loved and understood and accepted, no? And so many of our psychological problems, our behavioral issues, stem from the fact that we don't feel understood, connected, accepted, and loved. When we don't feel that way, things go terribly wrong. This is why this story of oneness and connection is so important, and why mysticism, I believe, is really the most healing and life-giving form of spirituality we have. And it's not a solely Christian idea by any stretch of the imagination. There are mystical streams within most world religions, like the Sufis in Islam, the Kabbalists in Judaism, certainly Buddhism and Hinduism have their own mystical streams, and many indigenous religions do too. You're aware of Native American spirituality. They often emphasize the harmony and dependence and interconnectedness of all things in nature. Indigenous religions are often animist too, meaning they believe that all things are spirited and minded, from the rocks and the trees to the birds and the bees to you and me. It's all spirit. It's all minded. It's all connected. It's all interlaced in this ecology of mutual dependence and reliance. And that's beautiful. And that's a story worth believing in, that's healing and life-giving. And that's the story, for me, at the center of my faith today. So that's my talk for this morning, the beginning of our short 3-week series, VBS for Mystics. And I'm curious, obviously, to hear your thoughts about all that, any questions you might have, but just maybe a couple of primer questions. What helps you feel connected to the world around you? What gives you a sense of connection to others or the world around you? What practices or what ideas? What makes you feel connected to God? And however you understand God, what makes you feel connected to the divine, to the sacred and the holy in your life? And then did someone raise their hand? If that question doesn't work for you, what gives you hope? What stories, what things give you hope or peace today in these profoundly sad and scary times? Where do you find hope? Where do you find peace? But yeah, anything goes in that regard. Yeah, Jason, here's the mic.
I guess two things. One, I've been reading a little bit about field theory.
Field theory, quantum
Yeah.
field theory?
Yeah, like apparently when you get down and down and down and down, there's parts of our existence, something out there that doesn't have any substance or matter at all. Like no particles, but still exist.
Mm.
So like you can have, like I was reading about the heliosphere and how in the vacuum of space out around our solar system, there's just a heat field. There's no light. There's no particles. It's nothing. But if you put something in it, it's going to get really hot. And that's kind of mind blowing to me. And it's almost like, as far as we can tell, the base layer of everything. They say that particles come from excitations in these fields. They come into existence from them. At the very base level, it's almost like, as far as we can see right now, the only thing that's there is potential and information.
Wow.
Like the potential to heat something up, the potential to affect physicality or substance, which is crazy to think about. Like, it's crazy to think that there's stuff out there that's not stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could think of it like just data.
Yeah.
Or a program that's running that affects things. So anyway, I was thinking about that. And then I've also been like meditating a little bit and thinking about how I don't think meaning is inherent in anything we created. And things are meaningful when we have a feeling and we lean into that feeling and try to understand it. And so it's been powerful for me to try to see what I'm feeling, and then the good stuff that I'm feeling, try to explore and see how that feeling takes place, what it is. And I think that we do it probably unconsciously, but that's where meaning in our lives come from.
Yeah.
Like our feelings towards our kids when we're playing with them, or, I don't know, drinking a beer on a hot day, even those kinds of things, can become meaningful. And that's where it lives. I'm not really a spiritualist type of person. I don't really believe that there's like some kind of meaning out there. I'm very humanist in that sense, but that doesn't mean that there isn't such a thing as meaning and such a thing as existence without substance, pure energy. So yeah, that's where I get my
Thank you for sharing what
stuff from.
gives you awe
Yeah.
and gives you meaning.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Thank you. Somebody else today. What gives you a sense of awe and meaning? What works for you? Yeah, Jason and then Abe, please. Thanks, Akila.
Hi, good morning. I mean, I could answer, as I always think, and my mind is going crazy with lots of different responses, but I'll share a specific example. And thanks for everyone for your support. I just got back a few weeks, I've rested for about a month from the AIDS life cycle, where we rode bikes from San Francisco to Los Angeles, approximately 600 miles. Took a lot of training and a lot of fundraising and a lot of learning about bicycles and a lot of sunblock and a lot of sunburns and scabs and all these other things.
Yeah.
But there were about 2,500 bicyclists, riders, all volunteer, all taking their own time to do this thing and all the infrastructure required to do it. And then there were about 2,000 volunteers who supported this effort, also on their own time, fundraising, showing up, using their vacation time for a week from work, flying to San Francisco from all over the world. And within, it's primarily LGBTQ community and allies, and so there's always, I think, within that community, a real wariness of using religious language. And but what they do talk about is that while you're on this ride, there's this thing called the love bubble, which sounds a little bit silly, but I would say that for me, after, being there and being a part of people who were, all there for a common purpose of helping others, and also, and by some, it was like memorializing others, people they've known, people that they've been, that were in their family, people that have passed on, people that are still around or struggled, maybe it wasn't with AIDS, maybe it was a cousin who committed suicide or something like that, or got beaten or murdered, all these things. And when we were all together and all in the same effort, day after day after day, 5,000 people, and sharing stories and sharing a very difficult experience, for me, that was all inspiring. And I definitely felt what I would say is the Spirit of God there, amongst there, when, kind of in the, I think it's written different ways in different scriptures, but, they said, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I, and you might imagine that, as like this invisible third entity that's sitting there right in the empty chair, like Alicia, or you could just say it's this, more Gnostic, mystical sense of God that isn't an individual being, but is this something magical that exists between all of us. And then when we're gathered together for like good or love or peace or healing, it's empowered in and of itself, right? And it's both mystical, but it's also practical.
Yeah.
Because we also know that when we gather together for a mutual purpose, we can do more than any one individual person can do.
Yes.
Right? So we have this mystical power available to us anytime, as long as there's other folks around. So that's where I felt it, and just to, I look at simple passages sometimes of the Bible and, to the ancient Israelites or the Hebrews, there was this message, that, he says, how's he say it? There's only one God, and it takes different traditions than kind of, I think, I'll use my words, twist that to mean like, this is the right one and yours is the wrong one.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of just saying, the dude literally just said there's only one. So you can also see that as like maybe lots of different names, but all the same thing, entity, spirit. And he kind of says it a lot of times.
Yeah.
There's only one God. That's it. There's only one, and isn't it amazing that there's so many different ways to experience that? So that's me.
Why would we limit ourselves? Like, yeah. I love that. Thank you, Jason. Amy.
Yeah, in terms of where I find that kind of feeling of mysticism or meaning or whatever, I think of it as my connection to other people. Obviously, like the main reason I continue to attend here is that I've just formed a lot of great relationships and friendships with people here, and it's a fairly simple idea, but I think that's the driving force behind, the habit of coming to a church on a Sunday morning, is because this is a type of community that and a group of friends that are different than, say, work friends or these other friends that you might play games with or something. It's like all that kind of it's like it completes, I think, an aspect of the human experience that I don't want to disappear from my life. I don't want to just pretend, well, I don't need to go to church anymore because it's all wrong and, they're all liars and, blah, blah, because it's unavoidable. It's totally unavoidable that you as a creature can comprehend things that are, beyond the material, whether they exist or not, whether it's a myth, whether it's just a bunch of dumb stories that we tell each other, that's irrelevant because it's inescapable that you'll have the desire to explain those things, And so I kind of like to get beyond just, having that creed that you recite or whatever else especially over the years, as I attended here, it just came to be, again, a place to connect with other people that, to have conversations, about these ideas, and I think of the meaning more in the relationships themselves, and I kind of extend that also to like, I don't sit there and I don't have a Bible study anymore. I grew up having, that was like an important plank of your spiritual practice is like you wake up and every day you need to spend some time in the Word, and
yet
that daily bread.
And yet you're teaching yourself Greek. And you're having the ultimate Bible study now, man.
Yeah, but in essence, it's like that. Like to me, that is like
No, I was playing it. Yeah.
like I have, because of that, obviously I've kind of reconnected with some of these with the Bible and other, ancient literature and all that kind of stuff. And to me, it's not about necessarily like learning some facts or learning some new vocabulary in an ancient language or something like that. It really is an exercise in connecting to human beings that lived and breathed on this earth.
Yeah.
They lived, they had lives exactly like we are all living lives right now. And they tried to explain things. They tried to explain their own existence. They tried to explain what reality was, all these things that we do. And, my, reading history for my whole adult life has been kind of an exercise in that. But especially like this reading, in ancient Greek, I almost think of it as like an empathy exercise. It's a desire to, get in their head.
Yeah.
As much as I'm able to really understand the way they viewed the world, and I kind of view that as being like, that to me is the best way to live life, is to do that with everyone, do that with everyone all the time, and I think that that's what, mystical or religious practice is for me. It comes down to those relationships and those human connections, and always seeking them out, looking at them as not transactional, not as being like, oh, I got to make some connections because I need a new job, I need to advance in my career, all that like transactional kind of like relationship building that exists in certain spheres of your life, to do that in a way that I think is a more genuine, like sort of religious or faith practice is like, you're forming these relationships to just live life together, to just to experience this world together, and to connect on that mystical level, and that to me is the kind of the core of why I keep doing this, so.
And that's a beautiful story. That is the story, right? That story of connection, relationships. No, it's great. Thank you, Abe. Yeah. Somebody else want to reflect today on any of this? Yeah, Keela.
I'll try to be brief. I think so. I guess kind of a couple things. One, when you were talking about the God being everything or whatever it was, I don't remember. I'm so tired. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
But no, remind me. I can't remember where in the Bible in the Old Testament, but where they ask God, like, "What are you?" And He says, "Tell them I am that I am."
Yes.
And it was just kind of like, yeah, that's it. I am that I am. And it kind of just encompassed everything you were just talking about. As for hope and faith, I think several years ago, I did a sermon writing workshop and I got assigned to the dry bones passage. Ezekiel? Is that
Yes,
right?
that's
Okay,
Ezekiel, Valley of the Dry Bones. Yes.
Yeah. And what I found when I did it was that, a big part of that was if I don't have faith, I get to borrow your faith. And then it kind of goes to like that Mr. Rogers meme that usually goes around, look for the helpers. And that was right around the time of the Pulse shooting. And so in Orlando, sorry.
Yes, I remember the Pulse shooting.
I know, but a lot of my students don't know anything except California. So I had to remember that
that's a separate problem.
Yeah. So I had to remember, like, they're like, what's the South? I'm like, okay. And so one of the things, it was like, right, sometimes I don't have hope or faith, but I can look at your hope or faith. So I can look and see the things that people are doing to help others. And then that gives me faith and that gives me hope. And I was thinking about this too, because, a lot older now than I used to be. I have chronic pain. Like I can't do a lot of the things I used to be able to do. Like, oh, let's go march. I'm not going to do that. Right. So that's not, but I can help in other ways. But there are people who can do those things. And those things also give me hope and faith. So that was the short version.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Great reflections. Anybody else today? Well, as we contemplate this month, not just in our liturgy, but also in my talks, I just love that we're focusing on why are we here? What connects us here? How do we find meaning in this thing together? And it's beautiful what we're coming up with. I love it. And I just think that that's who we always have been and who we always will be, regardless of what our metaphysics are. I do love metaphysics. It's my thing. I get it. It doesn't have to be your thing. I love metaphysics. I love talking with Jason about, what's going on in the solar system and the quantum. And you might be like, it's not my thing. That's cool. I realize that. I just want this to be a place that is healing and life-giving and a place of deeper connection for whatever that looks like for you. And yes, we should definitely connect over matters of how can we be better human beings and love our world better and take responsibility in our community, take action together, and help others, Absolutely. Those are the things that will always define what it means to be a spiritual community here. What you believe about metaphysics or God or those other things, it's all welcome. It's all good, right? All right, VBS for Mystics shall continue next week and the following. And then, of course, on the 27th, we're going to meet around a meal, which frankly, I think is something, well, not just me, but a lot of you are like, why we should just doing this no matter what, every single month. And yes, I love that because I feel like that's a huge part of what it means to do this thing called church together. It's just life. It's just friends. It's just us being with each other, sharing in great things together like food and drink and enjoying each other. That's all we have. That's really all we have is those moments together, those beautiful moments meeting over food and drink and just talking with each other about our lives and about what concerns us, what's hurting us. That's it. That's all we have. People often be like, what do you provide as a pastor? What do you provide as a church? This is it. If that's not enough, I don't know what to tell you. But this is it. This is all we have to offer. And it's beautiful. And it's all of its simplicity. It's just life. That's it. How beautiful is that? Anyway, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of you who do download the podcast and listen to it. See you here next week. Go in peace. Hang out. Have some coffee. Sure. Thanks for listening in on this week's edition of the Central Cast. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you join us next time. Bye-bye.